Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I think this is episode 103, 104, something like that. I'm not sure at this point. I try to keep track of them, but delighted to be joined on this episode by comics creator Jim Mahfood. Jim, welcome to the show. Thanks for talking with me today.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I try to keep my eyes on what's out there in the comics world, and I've enjoyed your work for some time. And then also got to get kind of a deep dive. We were talking about conventions right before we started recording. So I actually went to my first comics convention last summer, and that was Heroes Con, and you happened to be there. So got to sort of peruse the full array of materials that you've got out in the world, and I always enjoy your vision and your approach in comics.
Thank you. That's a really good show to start off with. A Heroes
Yeah,
Con. It's a
that's what I
classic,
was told.
old school kind of like this is what I prefer, which is no celebrities,
Hmm
no
hmm
movie, TV stars, and it's just comic book creators
Yeah,
and retailers mostly selling just comic books. So that is my most comfortable environment to be in as far as shows go. I do the bigger shows like New York and stuff too, which is fun, but
hmm
there's something so charming about Heroes Con that very welcoming and inviting if you're a creator.
yeah, absolutely. I'd been told by a couple of my friends that had been before that it was the show to go to. And I had just never been to a con for, one reason or another. So was glad to connect in that space and kind of see what the world of conventions was all about.
Yeah, that's great. And that one attracts like top talent. Like
Hmm
all the artists and writers, but mostly artists know that that's the show you go to exhibit as an artist. And it's a big like family reunion type show too, where
Oh,
you
nice.
see all your buddies, and it's a really great show for the hangouts as well, and the dinners and the after con, having a drink at the hotel or whatever. Like it's just a great show to catch up. And most people, everyone in Charlotte for the most part seems to be very nice.
Hmm
It's just a very relaxed, chill show as opposed to like San Diego and New York are the high energy kind of like,
Right.
hey, there's crowds, there's lines, but there's something fun about that manic energy, but it's a very different energy than something like Heroes.
And it's very much that like, oh, what's the trailer gonna be? Oh, what's this gonna be? I mean, that's kind of I hate to say it, but that's what I think of first when I think of the bigger shows is what are those trailers? What are the media things? And then the comics sort of get pushed to the background a little bit.
Yeah. That's the only disappointment for me of being in this with the big shows, because you're exactly right. It's more of the media first and the announcements first,
Hmm
and then all these other things become secondary. And I mean, the announcements are cool. They are pop culture shows now. They're not really comic book conventions. They're pop culture gatherings. And so you kind of, as an artist, like I have to go into that environment knowing that and not being like jaded about it. It's just, we're exhibiting an artist alley. Artist alley is now its own thing. And the
hmm
rest of the show and the hype and the insanity is like its other thing.
Right.
So
And I mean, to be fair, the comics live in my head in the same space as some of the movies and TV shows and video games and all of the things. Like you've done Tank Girl, and your take on Tank Girl was wonderful. And I mean that forever in my mind, if you say the character's name, I'm gonna picture Lori Petty. I mean, that's
mm-hmm.
gonna happen. So they do live together, but it's nice to see comics as their own thing too, that stand on their own feet without the other media to kind of be back there to prop them up.
Completely. Because I enjoy both as their own separate things. Like it
Hmm
was cool as a kid in the 80s when the first Batman movie came out and seeing the evolution of how all that happened. But then in my mind, Batman is still this awesome character that exists on paper. written and drawn
Mm-hmm.
by Frank Miller or drawn by David Mazzucchelli or Norm Breyfogle or whatever my favorite Batman artist is. It's like, well, that is in my brain as well.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you can have, to me, it's like we have so many options now. It's a bit overwhelming of how you can consume all this stuff.
Very true. And I love the publishers that you work with and the spaces that you work in with Image, Titan. You had your own company, have your own company, and have invested in that. So glad to hear about that as well. It's not on the official list, but the conversation kind of seems headed in this direction. If you'd like to talk about that just a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I've had the good fortune of just being a professional freelancer for the last 26 years of working in comics, dabbling in animation, character design, illustration, advertising art. And it's basically just building a brand around my own drawing style and aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And in comics, working for different companies, but also just self publishing my own work too. If I want to do like a little mini comic sketchbook or got a print or something, like I never hesitate to fall back on, well, I'm just going to just do this one myself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I did a specialty pop-up book a couple years ago with a buddy of mine. We did that as a Kickstarter, super
Yeah.
successful crowd-funded project. So that's the exciting thing, man, is there's so many options now for creators and for putting your work out. When I was trying to break in the early 90s, it seemed like the only option was, if you don't have the money to self-publish your own stuff, which we didn't at the time, we were broke art students, you kind of have to work for Marvel or DC. And so
Right,
you're
right.
waiting in those lines at conventions to show your samples to editors. And if you're not getting accepted to work at Marvel or DC, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a
Mm-hmm.
different landscape then. And now I feel like the floodgates are open to just so many options that if you've got the determination and some sort of following, you can hopefully craft that into making a success out of yourself and your work.
That's a very, very cool thing. Do you have go-to collaborations? Do you have folks that you automatically say yes to or are excited to work with when you get those invitations?
Yeah, I mean, whenever Alan Martin, one of the co-creators of Tank Girl, comes calling and there's a
Hmm.
Tank Girl project, I always say yes to that. Haven't done anything with him in about 4 years now, but there's been different books throughout the last 10 years that I've always said yes to, just because I love working on that character. Um, Brian Bendis is a friend of mine, and whenever he comes calling, which
Hmm.
again, that hasn't happened in a while, I did literally just one page for a Superman villains one shot like 3 or 4 years ago that he wrote, but it was him and I just doing this weird bizarro one
Nice, nice.
pager. But we worked together in the early 2000s on some comedy stuff for Marvel, Spider-Man books and different things. And but whenever Brian like comes calling, sure. I mean, the answer is always yes.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah, there's certain go-to people and just opportunities that when they arise, it you know, it's just an automatic yes.
You mentioned the '80s Batman and breaking in the '90s. What was what initially drew you to comics? What were those first experiences for you?
Just as a kid discovering comic books, I was immediately attracted to the idea of just words and pictures, just these stories on
Mhm.
paper that had this fantastic, incredible artwork. You know, the artwork part of it just immediately attracted me to this thing. There was something as a kid figuring out like, well, I think I can do this. I think I can play in this field of whatever this is, this merging of words and pictures.
Mhm.
And I've always been a huge music fanatic and a movie fanatic as well, but realizing early on, well, those are collaborative mediums. Like if you're a director, you have to have an entire crew helping you pull this thing off. If you're into music, you have to have a band and rely on other people for the most part. With comics, especially discovering indie comics, a lot of that, the idea of like, you can just sit, write, and draw your own stories, and all you need is some ink and paper. That was incredibly attractive to me because I've always been kind of like a lone wolf type character of just, I kind of just want to just do my own thing and be able to rely on my own voice and visual sense to just do what I want to do in this field. And comics was an answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like through the process of elimination of, I did try, I was in a band briefly in high school and it was fun, but it for me it was like, well, one of the band members is flaking out and can't make the practice, or
Right.
we don't have a space to rehearse in, or there was all these factors that, me being an impatient young man, I was like, okay, I just want to do the thing where I can just wake up and sit at the table and just make the thing I want to make. Like, I don't want to have to wait on people or deal with any roadblocks in the way. And that comics became a very clear path for me in that way. And especially indie comics, like I said, it kind of celebrates the individual. It celebrates unique voices, and the original Ninja Turtles comic book became a benchmark for me. Just these two guys making this comic. Ben Edlund with the Tick, just writing and drawing his own comic. Dave Sim with Cerebus. Again, just a guy writing and drawing his own visionary work with Gerhard on backgrounds or whatever. But that idea immediately created a chain reaction in my mind of like, well, I think this is my lane. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is
Yeah.
what I can do. And it was exciting, and still is. Like, I still love just sitting down and just writing and drawing my own stories. I like to collaborate with people. I enjoy working with clients and doing illustration work where I have to solve a problem and make a client happy and deliver a product. That's interesting and that has its own challenges, but there's also something just so fun and unhinged about like, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do with this project, with Girl Scouts, or with whatever thing that I want to do myself. It's extremely rewarding, man. But it's also, the challenge is like, well, if this fails, it's just all on you.
Right.
Like if
Right.
like if the story doesn't work, or your storytelling doesn't work, or something is off, or you alienate the reader, that's on you. So you kind of have to go into it with a confidence, almost a confidence and an ignorance in a way of just, I'm just going to bulldoze my way through this thing and just see if it works.
I
You know,
imagine there's a lot of tenacity in that too.
you have to just kind of go for it. And my style and the way I work is based mostly around instinct, um, and just going for it. Sometimes that backfires and you fall on your face, but that's okay because I've kind of built a career out of having this spontaneous, expressionistic work style, that's in the long run has benefited me. But I have 26 years of doing this. Like,
Right.
starting off that way is kind of like, um it's a bit more challenging than if you present yourself as a super digestible, mainstream, polished talent, because mainstream comics have a particular look. Mainstream movies and have a sensibility and a look that is digestible. When you show up with a portfolio like mine to conventions, there's always someone at my table that's like, oh, okay, like looking through my work, like, oh, this is something different. And I'm not sure if they even like it or not. It's just, oh, this is, you're doing something completely different. And again, man, that can work to your advantage to stand out, but it also can work against you where people want shiny, refined, polished things. And I'm coming along with my scratchy lines and ink splatters and crazy subject matter and psychedelic kind of sensibility. And some people, that might not resonate with them. But again, like I said, I've been able to kind of carve out my path.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a very cool thing. And as somebody that's looked at comics for decades now in my life, I mean, I really got started reading with comics in a big way. That was one of the things that attracted me to your work was this very fresh vision, fresh take. You mentioned Girl Scouts, and Girl Scouts started out with that was more of a self-published kind of thing. Am I right? And then
Yeah.
so it's kind of grown, and there's even a pilot on YouTube, if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah. It's gone through many versions. It was a self-published book starting in 95 when I was in college in art school. And then in 98, I did a mini series for Oni Press. And then I took it over to Image in like 2003, and it's been there ever since. I'm currently doing online comics with the Girl Scouts at zestworld.com. And that's like a subscription based kind of Substack type thing. And
Mhm.
there'll be a published version of all that material sometime next year. And then, like you mentioned, we did a live action pilot in 2015 for Ron Howard's production company. It was called New Form Digital. And I worked with this brilliant director, Mike Diva, who is currently directing all the digital shorts and fake commercials over at SNL.
Oh,
So
nice, nice.
Mike wound up blowing up and he like moved to New York and is full time at SNL. But yeah, man, you get these weird opportunities. And that's the best thing about having a freelance career for me is like all these strange, unpredictable things have happened over the last 26 years that I could have never planned for. But when it comes along, it's just like, oh wow, I didn't imagine this happening. Like being
Yeah.
on the set in LA of the live action pilot and seeing these actresses dressed up as my characters running around with like swords and fighting stuntmen and stuff. I was like, okay, this is so far beyond what I imagined when I was in art school, poor, hunched over my drawing table, creating this comic book in 95. Like, this is some next level shit going on now. So that is very fun and exciting when those kind of twists and turns happen in a career, you know.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Is that kind of would you say that's one of the center works from your portfolio, or are there other things that you want to put out there for people to make sure to check out that I guess you're most proud of, sort of go-to pinnacle moments for you in your work?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Girl Scouts is at the top, and then I think it's this three triple factor for me. It's Girl Scouts, working on Kevin Smith's Clerks comics in the late 90s, and
Hmm.
then also being part of the Tank Girl legacy is kind of the three things I'm best known for in the circle of comics and pop culture. The fourth would be I actually worked on the first Spider-Verse movie. I was a character designer and did pre-production art on that, and that was a huge honor to be part of. The movie obviously is like a groundbreaking visionary work. It won an Oscar award. People can see some of my work in the official. They did a coffee table art book that came out a couple years ago. So some of
Yeah.
my stuff is in that. But man, to be part of that project was a huge thrill because I started off all of this as a little kid being a Spider-Man fanatic. My love for comics and this world started off with my love of Spidey. So to be part of what I consider to be one of the best Spider-Man things ever made,
Mhm.
that's also for me, a big feather in the cap of knowing that I was just had a little part in that production.
It's cool. Full circle moment. Full circle. That's
Yes.
cool.
I
Yeah.
love those moments. And the Tank Girl is the same thing where I discovered Jamie Hewlett's original Tank Girl comics in like 93 when I first got to college. His work blew my mind in such a way it influenced me and inspired me to do Girl Scouts. And then Girl Scouts becomes a thing. And then I wind up becoming friends with Alan Martin, the co creator of Tank Girl, on Facebook. And he asked me to draw the next Tank Girl series he was doing at the time. So to be inspired by Tank Girl and then wind up actually drawing the book was another like revolutionary moment for me. A huge explosion in my brain of like, wow, I can't believe this is happening now. Okay.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, but you just go for it. Like when these things happen, you just say yes and invest yourself and just go for it, you know.
Love it when the universe comes together like that for
Yes.
creators. And I wish that for all creatives out there that they get that experience. It's
Yes.
cool. Yeah. So I'll make sure to mention Zest World and I'll also link your website. I always like to give folks the time to talk about upcoming conventions, appearances, things that you're working on. I know you're taking some well-deserved time of rest, which good for you because self-care and time of rest is totally a thing that I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And this world of writing and creating, it never stops, right? So you kind of have to put those brakes on at certain places and return to the creative wells in some ways. So anything
Yes.
that's coming up.
Yeah. Well, you're right about taking the breaks, by the way, because that in my youth, that was never a thing. I just kept going and going and going. And just in the last couple of years, man, I've done the thing of like, gonna take a little break for a couple weeks or
Mm,
go travel somewhere that isn't a convention. But speaking of conventions, I do have Rose City in Portland in September, New York Comic Con in October. I'm going to Belgium for the first time ever. Right after New
nice.
York, late October, they do a show there called FACTS, FACTS. And that's a cool international show. Um, that's probably going to be my, I think, last show of the year. And then I have the currently my workload is writing and drawing brand new Girl Scouts material, which I post on zestworld.com. And people can go there and actually subscribe and read the back catalog of strips for free.
Nice.
So there's
Very nice.
subscription tiers that you can pay for to get exclusive content, like a Patreon, excuse me. And but there's also an option of just subscribe for free and you can just read the material. And there'll be a print version of all that stuff next year. And then I can't say what it is yet, but I have an extremely exciting creator owned comics project that will be hopefully coming out next year. And I'm working with one of the top creators in all of comics on it. And when people hear the announcement, they're going to freak out. It's going to be big. So I'm
Awesome.
really excited about that one. That one's like been stewing for a while and we're finally figuring out the schedule and so I'm excited, man. I have a good a good list of things coming out in the foreseeable future. So yeah, and I'm online. I post almost every day on my Instagram, which is just at Jim Mahfood, and I just do artwork, illustrations, behind the scenes stuff, and so I try and stay up on the social media things, of course, but I don't like freak out about it. It's I treat it like fun,
Right.
like
As it should be.
yeah, because that stuff, man, can, as you know, I'm sure can like drive you crazy of like likes and comments and algorithms. I came to the realization a couple years ago, like, don't worry about any of that stuff. If it's fun and you want to put your work out there, do that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, like it could drive you crazy, you know?
And full circle as well, you'll be going to Belgium, home of like Von Disney, and there's so much comics history there. Like
Yeah.
in the world, that's one of the places that a lot of this started. So that's very cool as well.
Yeah.
Little jealous, little jealous. Um,
Well, let's talk to the promoters and get you flown out there
Sounds good. Love it.
as a visiting journalist or something. But
There you go.
when I travel, like I need to make extra time when I'm there because, like you just said, there's things that are worth researching.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go to other countries, I have to always figure out like, well, can I stay for 4 or 5 extra days and make an actual trip out of this so that I see more than just the hotel and the convention center?
Check out some cafes, some cartooning history. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Walk the streets and just get
Mhm.
a sense of it, you know.
Yeah. Sounds like lots of good things ahead. And thank you for taking some time to talk about your work, talk about your influences. Hope folks out there will revisit your work or visit it for the first time and check out Zest World and all the other things. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me. This was super easy
We
and
try, we try. Yeah,
yeah,
wonderful. A joy on my end as well. And yeah, again, just thanks so much for a great conversation.
no problem.